This is the last episode of Relational. I'm going to leave this up until the weekend, and then I am going to put all the episodes into a G Drive folder and make that link available if you go to the Twitter account that this podcast has always had, which is Relational Pod at Relational Pod on Twitter. The link will be there, and you can get any of the episodes you like. They'll all be numbered and in order. I had planned to go 52 weeks before thinking about pulling the plug on it, but as it turns out, I am turning my attention and putting my efforts into a new podcast that the department where I work is going to sponsor. And for the first partial season that we're going to do as proof of concept, we're just going to do 5 episodes in the spring, one about every 3 weeks. And the school is not actually going to pay for it to be up until we've had that first season, and we're going to use it to make the argument for it to go in the budget for next fall. Which means that this spring, I am going to be paying for that podcast to be hosted. And hosting a single podcast is, not enough to bankrupt me. I've been doing it. I have been paying for this podcast out of my pocket. But I am not paid well enough. I am not rolling in dough enough that I can afford 2 of them. So this is it. This is the last Monday of 2017, and on my next paycheck, I am going to want to take what I would have paid for this platform and pay for the platform, set up the platform for the new one. So these are the dying days of this podcast. And what I had originally planned to do was I was going to go back and check out all the episodes, and in the last episode, I was going to try to pull it all together and see where I wound up. But you know what? It's Christmas. That's a lot of work. And honestly, possibly, arguably, it's a healthy thing to do that, but I've gone through this much of my life not trying to synthesize my thoughts over incredibly long arcs. I know there are people who journal. I know that it can be a very healthy practice and a way to grow. It's not the kind of thing that's ever appealed to me, and so this closing episode is not going to be an attempted 30,000 feet view or synthesis of all my thoughts over the 50 weeks since I got this started on the day Donald Trump was inaugurated. Instead, probably it won't be surprising to hear that what has been on my mind lately is Christmas. What might be a little bit surprising is to hear what I actually do about Christmas, which is to say not much. When I was a young child, I got as much into Christmas as anybody. I really, really loved seeing presents under the tree. I really loved opening presents. I really loved going and visiting Santa. All those things were exciting. I used to like to sit and just watch the Christmas tree. When I was a small child, it was in the 1970s, and Christmas lights were not very high-tech at the time. We had a set of Christmas lights that would blink, and they were plugged into an outlet in the front room of the house that we never used. It was kept very neat and tidy in case company came, which virtually never happened because my family was not that social. But we had an outlet that was hooked up to a light switch. So we put the tree up, put the lights on it, plug them into that outlet, and then when you wanted to sit and watch the lights, you flip the switch, and I remember that it would take a good 4 or 5 minutes before, when you flip the switch, the lights would come on, but then they had to warm up for like 4 or 5 minutes before they would start to blink. And then I would sit and just watch it. And there was just something about it. It just gave me a tingle. It just felt like somehow reality had changed. Reality had become more sharp. It was a little bit like the moment when Dorothy steps out of her house, out of black and white Kansas, and all of a sudden here in Oz, there's all this color. When you had the Christmas stuff up, all of a sudden the world was just more colorful. Now that was when I was very young. And what I think happens to a fair number of people is I got to the age where I didn't believe in Santa Claus anymore, and I can't pin down when that was. It happened. Probably my older brother dropped a few hints. And then I got to be a preteen and a teenager, and at that point, Christmas was about greed. There were always things that I wanted and was frustrated that I couldn't get for myself because the allowance or the little bit of money that I made working in the church nursery wasn't enough, so I would make those as requests for Christmas, and usually they managed to secure something that was big enough and exciting enough to make me cheerful for a few minutes. Then I got to college and to be a young adult, and honestly, I soured on Christmas altogether. Not long after that, My brother and a couple of my cousins started having kids, and then I got to be an audience member. I got to be an onlooker while their kids, who were now toddlers, infants and toddlers, they had their first Christmas experiences, and that was really, really enjoyable. So for a while, I was a gift giver, and that was fun. And then I had an attack of principle somewhere along the way, and the rule that I laid down for myself was the only people that I will give Christmas presents to are people who are under the age of 18 that I am related to. And the only Christmas presents I will give are either things I make with my own hands, or I will give a book that I chose with the child in mind, that I took what I knew about that child's interests and personality, and I went and I did some research, and I tried to find a book that I thought when they saw the book they would be excited about reading it. Now, the thing I made with my own hands, that didn't last very long. A few times, I had a period where my hobby was making modular origami, and I made some pretty impressive little shapes. You fold several hundred pieces, and then you put them together, and they can make a three-dimensional puzzle. And a couple of my nieces and nephews got things to hang up in their room, and they were suitably excited and told me thank you. But that kind of ran its course, and when I wasn't doing that anymore, it just became every year I was buying people books. Well, they are now all over 18, so I really don't do any Christmas shopping anymore. And as I think I mentioned back around May, the rhythms of the year are different for me. Christmas, I don't really get together with family at Christmas because my family is all several states away, and it's not a good time of year to travel because Texas gets ice storms. And they get them every year, but every year they look around and say, where'd all this come from? And there are never any salt or sand trucks or anything like that, so the whole state shuts down. And so, for me, Christmas has become a day in which the things I would ordinarily do on a typical day, come to my workplace, sit in my office and work, those are available to me, but the things that I would ordinarily do to take a break, step out, visit a business, go to the library, things like that, those are all shut down. And it also kind of looms in the back of my head that that's a day when a lot of other people are getting together and they're having this very exciting, very joyful holiday. This annual and very tradition-laden celebration. And that I am not doing that. And there have been some days when I actually felt a few little ripples of loneliness from that. But when I think clearly about it, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the rhythms of my year are very different. Every year I have graduation. For most families, they have graduation a few times in their life. They have their own graduation, then their kids graduate, then they wait another generation and their grandkids graduate. But for me, it's every May. And just about every May, it's this very intense, very bittersweet experience because these students that I've come to feel so close to, that I've come to admire and respect and feel so much affection for, they are so proud of themselves and they are so excited about the prospects that lie ahead and they are so nervous because they're not sure what the next step ought to be. But their family gathers around them and celebrates what they've accomplished. And I celebrate them as well because they've got to the point where they can do more and more. They've kind of reached the pinnacle of what it is that I can teach them. And their work has gotten better and better. And they carry themselves with so much more confidence. And they so clearly are now confident adults ready to go out and take on adult challenges with some of the storms of childhood and teenage years behind them. That's my Christmas. And it's my Christmas because I get it every single year. And I look around and people who are not in education, not maybe in high school or college education, they don't get that. For them, the month of May, it's spring, summer's coming on. If they have kids, maybe they're making some vacation plans, but this just peak of excitement and joy, this holiday, this celebration, they don't have it. So I don't really do Christmas, but I have a Christmas. It's just different. And then there's the contrary part of me that soured on Christmas for the same reason a lot of people sour on Christmas. Doorbusters are absolutely vile. Shopping in general, shopping for Christmas presents. Yes, it can be, if you enjoy shopping, good for you. And it can be a way of thinking intensely about the people who are in your life, thinking creatively and laterally, and really, really letting your attention rest on what you think will make them happy. But you're trying to do it by giving them a possession. And I got dissatisfied with that approach a long time ago. When it came to other people buying presents for me, I hate getting presents because honestly, if I want something, I'll go out and buy it. And when I buy it, I will pick the one that fits a lot of different expectations and wishes of mine, and I'm very particular about that kind of stuff. So I've told people for years, family members of mine, when they wanted to buy me a present, they say, give us some guidance, give us some tips. And I would say, why don't you just write me a nice note? Because if you take your own words and your own wishes, and I have that to sit and read and enjoy, I get just as much of a feeling of your warmth as if you give me a box with colorful paper on it that I get to rip open. Honestly, all that is that's a cue for me to pretend to look excited, to put on that performance so that you'll feel satisfied, and the whole thing feels very fake to me. And it's been actually a lot of years since I've participated in a gift exchange with pretty much anybody. And so I guess you could say that I've opted out of it. Now, as I am approaching 50, and as I have this ongoing life, not married, no kids, very separated from my immediate family, they're on the other end of the country, and most of the time these days I don't even travel to see them in the summer anymore. My closeness, the intense experience of relationships that I have is with my colleagues. It is to a very limited extent with the people I go to church with, and probably I need to invest a whole lot more of my presence and my effort into that than I have been in years past, and it is with my students. And the interesting thing about my students is, as more and more former students accumulate, I get this bigger and bigger cast of characters who, through the quiet months of my year, through the summer, and even through Christmas, there are more and more of them that are likely to reach out and say, I haven't talked to you in a while, why don't we get together for coffee or for lunch? And if I have another, let's say, 15, 20 years to do this job, and I keep accumulating former students that want to reach out and catch up occasionally, probably naively, I tell myself that is enough social contact to be really satisfying. I mean, they're weak ties. Sociologists would recognize those right away. Those are weak ties. Those are not people that you call up in the middle of the night when you need to be bailed out of jail. Those are people that you think very highly of them, they think very highly of you, but you have no obligation to them, they have no obligation to you. You are in no way committed to one another in an ongoing unit. You're just fond of one another and familiar with one another. But to have so many of them that you don't necessarily feel like you have to be a burden on any of them, and you can still get enough enjoyable social contact in your life that you feel kind of plugged in, that's kind of a nice little setup. Except, the more I read the research about aging well and about how isolation and loneliness have really, really devastating consequences for mental health and even for physical health, the more I worry that I am going into a chapter in my life when both of those are going to decline. And I think I may have opted out of Christmas. I may not get together with my family. I may not do gift exchanges because I'm soured and cynical about all of it. It seems very inauthentic and fake. I worry that down the road there's a big wake-up call coming. That when you opt out of too many of those things because they don't suit your own particular expectations, when you don't compromise a little, when you don't exert yourself to reach out and be part of that, you find yourself far down a road where you wish you could have, where you wish you had in the past, and you can't find your way back to the beginning of that road. And this has me thinking about our social connective tissue, and in particular about politics. Because I think that communities have a narrative that pulls them together. One of the times that I feel the most plugged in to the town where I live is every year on the 4th of July, there's a 10K that goes through town. And here in the Pacific Northwest, It's nice and cool. So on the 4th of July, it makes sense to go run a 10K. Most days, it's in the 60s or even in the 50s. It's comfortable weather to run. Back where I grew up, even the first week in July, it's pretty brutally hot. And the idea that you would go out and run a 10K in July? Are you suicidal? But this town, running is so much a part of the shared narrative that I go to that 10K and I see so many people from so many different demographics. And there are some people I see every year, but there are hundreds and hundreds. And on the anniversary years, sometimes I believe over 1,000 people show up for it. And it just feels like the city coming together. And that particular 10K has been run for well over 40 years. So it's an event that has continuity to it. We have these narratives that draw our community together. And I think that there is a naive view of them that in some ways parallels how children see Christmas. For children, Christmas is about magic. And yes, the presents are exciting, but really the idea, Santa Claus is coming into your house. In the months and weeks leading up to Christmas, you can ask for anything. You can make wishes. And the rest of the year, you get told no so often. But around Christmas, you get to build up that sense of anticipation. And there are all these decorations and pageants and all these physical, visible, observable tokens of magic and of wishes. And there's a form of naive patriotism that's almost the same way, where we can make wishes about who we are collectively and how we come together, and we have a lot of physical, visible, observable tokens that tell us we are that. And we aren't. We may have a collective identity, but we are so very different, and we have such incompatible, divergent needs and interests that those tensions are always threatening to pull us apart. But then for some people, Christmas is nostalgia. It's looking backward to being so taken by that magic and that ability to make wishes. And it is the enjoyment of facilitating that environment, that reality, that altered reality, which really is augmented reality, much of which is in the imagination. Talk about augmented reality before it relied on digital devices. There are so many people whose enjoyment of it is giving that experience to children. I had a fresh interest in Christmas when there were toddlers and kids in my family, and I could watch just how full of wonder they were when they saw all of the Christmas setups, all the Christmas props. That was enjoyable, even though I wasn't experiencing the magic anymore. I was watching the effect it had on them. And there are people who go into public service, and there are people who try to organize and try to mobilize into political life, because I think they can see what it's like for other people when other people see community work well. And then there's me, and I have opted out of Christmas because I was dissatisfied with Christmas. And there are lots of people who have opted out of politics, and they've opted out of public life because they were dissatisfied with it, because they were soured on it. And I have my own different Christmas, and I categorize myself differently and say graduation is my Christmas. And there are a lot of people who will join clubs and hobby groups and other social circles, and that becomes their community, and they don't want to be involved in civic life because civic life is only frustrating when actually the groups that they choose are more enjoyable. But I'm really just starting to get the stirrings of concern that I need to turn back to those big foreposts of family life, that I need to go back and reclaim Christmas and go back and plug myself into Christmas with my church, if nothing else, with my family ideally, even though that geographic challenge is a bear to overcome. But I need to, even if it's not my natural inclination. Because those things, they're not about me. They're not set up to fit me comfortably. But not everything that it's important to do to keep your ties to your people robust and healthy, not all of those things that you need to do are going to fit you comfortably. So here I sit on a Christmas morning when I didn't open a single present. I actually had a really good Christmas morning for reasons that are uninteresting. Well, I mean, I slept really well, which at my age is not a guarantee. And just by accident of the calendar, I whipped up the batch of dal that I'm going to eat off of for the next 5 days, and it turned out really well. Oh, my heavens, that thing was velvety when I was stirring it up this morning, and I thought I cannot wait to get the first spoonful of that stuff into my mouth. But as Christmas presents go, they're very ordinary. And maybe part of what I and what a lot of people need to arrive at when it comes to civic life and public life is the presents may be ordinary. But I got to the point where I didn't believe in Santa anymore, and the magic went away and I turned greedy and I turned it on its head. And then I got to the point where I was able to give back, and I took the greed and I turned it on its head. And then the conditions that made that possible grew out from under me, and the people that I'd been buying for, they aged out of the system. But maybe now I need to return to Christmas being something that I need to do as one little investment in a long-term project of keeping my mesh of relationships healthy. And maybe the way we first come to be idealistically aware of our government and our country, maybe that somewhere along the way turns into greed, then turns into a way of giving back, then turns so dysfunctional that the conditions of doing it grow right out from under us, and that's where we are right now. And maybe where we need to wind up is we need, from our own choices, our own motivation, even at the cost of our own discomfort, to turn and go back to the very parts that if we were entirely free to choose, we would reject. But we know that we need them. And that is the last thing I have to say on the subject.